Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Savage and councillors. Shannon Miedema with Energy and Environment in the Planning Department. And I have beside me Mel Diagar, who is with Sustainability Solutions Group, which is our consulting firm that is working with us on developing Halifact 2050, acting on climate together. And we're happy to be here today to provide you with a brief presentation related to the information report that you received in December on progress to date. We're in our final stages of developing the plan now. And what's clear to us is that the amount of change required to our everyday business and systems and processes and the work that we do every day is likely the largest change management challenge we've ever had to face as a municipality. And the challenge to leaders here and all around the world really is, can we rise to the challenge of addressing climate change, understanding that it requires both disruptive and transformational change to the work that we do day in and day out. And if leaders in cities and countries and businesses and academia and so on don't answer this with a resounding yes, we fear we won't be able to stop the irreversible impacts of climate change. Da, da, da. So as you know, you as Halifax Regional Council unanimously declared a climate emergency here in January of last year, of 2019. And I think we're actually the second city in Canada to do so after Victoria. And today there have been more than 1,260 declarations across 25 countries, encompassing almost 800 million people globally. And in Canada, there's been 468 declarations to date. So why an emergency and why now? Basically because the world's climate experts have told us so. They released a special report on the differences between staying within a 2-degree warming world and a 1.5-degree warming world. And the differences between that half degree are significant in terms of displacement caused by sea level rise, more species extinction, higher risk to marine ecosystems and our fisheries we depend on, more risk to human health and security, and the list goes on. And the scariest part really is our window of time to act before it is too late to reverse the consequences of the warming. We really have 10 years, critically, to course correct before scientists fear that we will reach the point of no return, so to speak, where the destabilization of our climate will be less hard to predict and manage as the impacts will become more severe. And we have a lot to do in 10 years in order to keep within that 1.5 degrees of warming. On a global scale, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us that we need to reduce emissions coming from our buildings, all types of buildings across the globe, by 80 to 90%. That is a big number. We need to increase the renewables providing our electricity by 70 to 85% by 2050. And we need a 30% reduction in final energy from our transport sector. And this is all in 30 years. So what does that mean here in Halifax? Not only are the world's scientists issuing dire warnings on a fairly regular basis, we're seeing in the news the plight of Australia with their wildfires, climate emergencies being declared across the globe, but here at home we had another hurricane in the fall, as we all well know. I was studying at Dal when Hurricane Juan hit, and speaking with people at the time, it was the first real hurricane and impact of that size in their lived experience. And now I, like many of you and us in the room, have experienced 2 such impacts here in HRM. And we know that this isn't a coincidence, as extreme weather events are increasing in severity and frequency because of climate change. Shortly after the hurricane hit, we saw our youth, our global youth, speak out strongly to government in strikes around the world. And this is a photo from here in Halifax, which I know many of you attended. Our younger generations are scared for their futures and are imploring those in power to act swiftly and drastically to course correct. But the good news is that much of the power lies with cities. It really does. 70% of greenhouse gas emissions occur in cities themselves. And while we don't directly control the majority of those emissions ourselves corporately as a municipal government, we do have influence over a lot of it. We can influence through regulatory and policy change, programs, incentives, We can act as conveners and leaders and partners. And we have a vision in our municipal planning strategy to create a healthy, vibrant, and equitable community. And it's critical that we address climate change if we're to realize this vision. So Halifact 2050 is our proposed city's response to the climate crisis. It's an ambitious plan to drastically cut our emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change that we are seeing now and that we need to prepare for as we go forward. It's actually an update of some existing climate plans because HRM has been active on climate change for more than a decade, actually more than 2 decades. So we're updating our existing community energy plan and our corporate climate plan, and we're adding in the critical piece of adaptation as well. And the key objectives are to transition us to a low carbon economy, to build community resilience of our people and our infrastructure. It is an evidence-based and integrated approach, incorporating the IPCC-driven targets that are founded in science and research, and it responds to climate change sustainably and equitably, with the notion that we don't want to transition leaving anyone behind in the process. And it's really through this lens of diversity and inclusion that we've been engaging our community to develop our action plan. Because no one government or organization can tackle the complexities of climate change alone, we knew it was critical to form meaningful and lasting relationships with our key stakeholders, both outside and inside our organization, as well as with the public. We invited more than 250 internal and external stakeholders to the table to be part of the team that influences this new climate strategy and who hold, importantly, some of the responsibility for implementing it. Stakeholders include all levels of government, utilities, nonprofits, advocacy groups, academics, educators, industry, Indigenous peoples, African Nova Scotian communities, Acadian groups, our youth, and many more. My team is engaged publicly through online channels and by popping up at events throughout the spring, summer, and fall. And it's worth mentioning that not a single person ever denied the realities of climate change to us in all of our engagements. And they were grateful that the city was leading and taking action on this important issue. We've also delivered many formal presentations and have of late been invited into less familiar circles for us, such as the Nova Scotia chapter of the Canadian Oil Heating Association, or the Education Day for the building, design, and construction industry, faith-based organizations, policy groups, and soon the Conference Board of Canada. So I'm going to pass it over to Mel to give an overview of the work that her firm has done with the modeling and all of it. I'll stop talking. Go ahead, Mel.
Thank you, Shannon. Good afternoon to all of you as well. So we've been working on doing some quantitative analysis to understand where Halifax is in terms of our current emissions, where we might be by 2050 in the absence of any significant change or action, and where we really need to be in line with a 1.5 degree pathway. So the chart that you can see up today is essentially demonstrating that as of 2016, which is the baseline that we used, Halifax is at about 5.8 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent emitting on an annual basis. By 2050, that will actually reduce by about 33%. A majority of that is coming from the cleanup of the provincial grid that is happening over time, as well as quite a lot of efficiencies that we're seeing in the transportation sector that are happening organically in vehicles. So 33% is great, but we still have a really, really long way to go. That bottom line that you see is essentially a 1.5 degree pathway. It is scientifically where we should be and where we need to be in order to keep in line with a 1.5 degree. So by 2050, we need to have reduced to net zero, to very close to zero with minimal offsets, which we know we will probably need to be in line with where we need to be. And I think one of the most important parts of this too, it's not just the end target. You can see from this that by 2030, that also means we need to have reduced by 75%. So that's a significant decrease over the next 10 years. What this chart essentially demonstrates is that it's not just about that end goal. It's not just about net zero by 2050. It's about how we get there and how quickly we are able to do it. As you can see, the middle chart essentially and the bottom chart have the same end goal, but they have very, very different pathways. And what's important about that is that cumulatively between now and 2050, we will have emitted a significant amount of emissions. Even if we meet that target by 2050, we need to do it very, very quickly. And so in the absence of doing anything, we would have exceeded our 1.5 degree carbon budget by 2027. At 28, again, emphasizing the need to decrease significantly in the next 10 years. So we've done some initial modeling to try and understand where some of the big areas of action and emissions reductions may come from. These are very high-level results, just to give you an idea of what we've been looking at. Essentially, this depicts the ability to reduce emissions in some core areas and sectors within the city in order to get us close to that net zero goal by 2050. So again, the BAU getting us 33% of the way, but we really have at least another 62% and preferably all the way to 100% to go. And so a significant amount of that is in our buildings. We, needing to retrofit our buildings, generating large renewables, whether they be rooftop solar or much bigger community scale. Looking at net zero buildings, ensuring that everything that we build today is as energy efficient and close to net zero as it can be, so that we don't lock ourselves into decisions and make it harder for us to get to 2050 goals. And of course, cleaning up the transportation sector, which will significantly come from the electrification of vehicles.
So the task ahead is not small, and these are just some high-level, bullet points of the types of things we're thinking about as we finalize the climate plan to present to you in the spring. Things like only building to net zero ready, retrofitting existing buildings, which really means prioritizing at first the most vulnerable to climate impacts and doing different actions that will reduce the thermal and electrical energy demand by half, and electrifying the heating and water systems, and also looking at resilience to climate change when we're doing these retrofits. So what can we do to prevent flooding? How do we adapt to things like extreme heat, power outages, et cetera? We know we need to do a significant expansion of rooftop solar across our communities, as well as large-scale renewable energy development. As Mel said, electrification of transportation. We need to look at further reducing our waste and our water consumption. We need to focus on doing some detailed risk and vulnerability assessments of critical infrastructure and services. We have begun this work at a high level and are drilling down into more detail over time as we get more funding. We need to put some more efforts into flood protection and flood evacuation planning. And we are doing some great work on food security now. And a recommendation is to do a food system vulnerability assessment for the entire municipality. These are some of the key actions. There are many more for us to consider from our consultants. But with great challenge comes great opportunity. Climate change isn't just an expense or a hassle to be managed. It provides incredible economic and social opportunity as well. Transitioning to a low-carbon economy means creating new jobs and businesses and technologies, and a lot of climate mitigation actually saves us money. Since our on-site energy manager, David Brushett, began about a year and a half ago, we've implemented 115 projects for the cost of $1.8 million before accounting for the rebates that we get back from Efficiency Nova Scotia, leading to an annual operating savings, so year over year, of $1.25 million. So we're winning from that work already. Also, it's estimated by Public Safety Canada that you save on the adaptation side when you spend on mitigation. So for every dollar you spend to cut carbon, they estimate you save 3 to 5 on recovery costs down the line. Our business cases for climate action become even stronger when we consider that carbon is likely going to increase in price over time. Climate action is also providing us an opportunity to improve the lives of our residents, because everything that we do to reduce energy poverty and reduce risk to climate impacts will improve lives, especially of those most vulnerable to these impacts. And we know that if we focus on our climate vulnerable populations, that we are focusing largely on our communities currently facing inequity. And this is work that our city is excelling in right now and focusing on, with diversity and inclusion and reconciliation, along with our work to develop a social policy framework. This is all to improve our communities and the lives of our residents. We're active in food security and housing affordability. These are all issues that get compounded by climate change. So the next steps for us are to finalize our plan in detail and go through the report review process. We are currently collecting letters of commitment from our external stakeholders. We've collected quite a number, and a few more are coming, which we're really excited about, to show their commitment and support to the collective action that we need going forward. And we will be needing, based on the size of the task, the urgency, the scale, and the timing we have to do it, we will be needing staff resources to succeed, as well as probably some additional dollars in consulting work going forward, which is likely happening outside of our current budget process. So just to highlight that. So there's no doubt that it's going to take a lot of courage and creativity and smart people to get this right. We are working hard now and are excited to return to you in the spring to discuss the final proposed climate action plan for our city. Thank you very much.